Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to IYRS this evening. There's sort of a method to the start of this, and my part of it is a minimalist part. We're going to have a conversation this evening, and I just want to put some context around it before we introduce to you the people in the roundtable. Back in the spring, we decided to create a series called Masters of Craft. And we thought it would be wonderful, given that in this community there are many artists and craftspeople doing wonderful work, to feature tours of their studios, small tours, and to hear them speak about their craft and their process. So we did that, and the folks that you're going to hear this evening were the people on that tour. So I'd like to just simply start by telling you who is here, and I'll mention their name, and Richard has indicated I can only say one or two words about each of them. Nick Benson, stone carver. Clint Clemens, action photographer.
Stand up, Nick. Okay. Yeah.
Peter Dippenbrock, sculpture designer. Howard Newman, sculptor restorer. Clark Poston, shipwright, woodworker, educator. Benoit Rouen, artisan bowmaker. Didi Sundam, jeweler and digital artist. And now, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Richard Saul Wurman. Thank you.
Each of these people knows something that's rather spectacular in the depth that they know it. A number of them really care about how things get put together. And we're in a room here, which is an amazing room that used to be a generator. It used to be big generators in this room. This provided electricity for the city. And in this room, at a different part of the year, each student builds a boat. They steam the wood. They build it from scratch. And we go, isn't that wonderful? From scratch, you could do that. You can do things from scratch. Most of the people around here know how to do things with their hands. But I'll lead off by saying I asked Nick, does he feel that he's cheating by not cutting some of his letters? And they blast them out? Do you feel cheated using a computer for the type now? Would it be better to do that? I don't know if it'd be better. What you make use of and what you don't make use of and where you draw the line about the tools we have. So, Nick.
I don't think my microphone works, but you can probably all hear me, right? Yeah. Okay, good. This is interesting because I had just talking about materials in general.
Talk to me and talk to the other people here. The hell with them, talk around here.
Since you brought up this idea of materials and you're talking about, oh, well, we're all so closely connected to these materials, I just had a quick conversation with Benoit earlier about the wood that he uses in his violin bows. And I said, well, you know, it's interesting to me because this wood has got to have a lot of responsive quality that the user of the bow picks up on and actually uses in order to perform properly. So he has to know a hell of a lot about the nature of the wood that he makes these bows out of. I find that really, really interesting. And then above and beyond that, I was saying, you know, Benoit, the nice thing about the bow too is that my father plays the violin. And sometimes I look at the
fiddle. He plays the fiddle.
He plays the fiddle.
Okay.
Let's tell it like it is.
Yeah.
But some of the forms in the bow, some of the organic forms in the bow that Benoit carves, remind me an awful lot of some of the forms that I see in calligraphic form. So there's an interesting interaction there between how the craftsman tends to repeat certain organic forms. They come up often.
But he's making things not out of wood now.
Well, he can do carbon fiber as well.
He's doing carbon fiber now. Do you feel you're cheating when you do carbon fiber? If you don't need one, give it to somebody else.
No, okay, because I have a little voice and a very, very strong French accent. Yes, but carbon fiber bows, yes, I pioneered this kind of bows, but it was just to reproduce the characteristics of the best bows at an affordable price, because students were very penalized. Because they don't have a lot of money, they have to buy decent bows at very high prices. So carbon fibers was an excellent substitute material, and this is why I thought it was useful for them to have the possibility to afford this. But it's not, carbon fiber making is not an art, to my opinion. It can be very interesting, it can be very edgy, but it's not an art. Like bow making, like working wood or stone or bronze.
So there's an interesting...
Yeah.
So right now we're talking about craftsmanship and materials. And as I look around this group, everyone is dealing with physical materials. And myself is a standout to that, and to Didi as well, but not as a jeweler, but as a
In the
visual
photography.
artist.
Yeah,
So what is the material? Okay, do you have to have a material that constitutes, that is a requirement for you becoming a craftsman?
You know, my son-in-law was, when he first came to our family, he came out and looked around my workshop, and I was telling him all these, about a lot of tools, and he said, he's a writer. And he said, right, this is your pencil. And he said, because he noticed that when I walked around, a lot of times I didn't even look where I was picking things up. I would just do this and do that, and I'd make things. And for a writer's point of view, that's my pencil. And that made a lot of sense to me, because what we're talking about, as one way to describe this, is we just have different kinds of pencils.
I have a different recording device. That's how I look.
Here, you got to grab for the mic. You have to grab for the mic. We just have to be orderly about
So I
that.
look at the camera as simply a recording device. I don't pick up a camera and say, oh, I'm going to go take a picture. You see it first in your mind, as I'm sure we all do, and then you go and you use your hands and you create it, and you use your eye and you translate or whatever it is. But it's the same thing. The camera is simply a recording device.
Well,
I was just going to say something too. What I was thinking, your question was more, what would we have in common as that defines craft when we're all actually working with materials, but you're working, as I do when I do photography, with image and the camera is physical, but it's not what you're using as you. What I was going to say is honing. I feel like that's one thing that, as craftspeople, whether it's a photographer or when we are working on something to reach our goal, we're honing it. That's what I feel like I'm actually honing in on something, like whether it's honing the metal, honing, filing and all that, or I'm focused on the computer and the colors, and I'm just in that world of just creating. And I think that is what craft can be too. It's like this honing of something. It's not.
you see, I don't
just
agree
about-
with this idea that there's a difference between any of these things. I think that what it's really all about is why it's hard to be married. I mean, it's easy to be by yourself and you can dream but when you actually have to interface with some other human being and learn to deal with that all the time, that's like making something with your hands. And then, by the way, I appreciate what you say about you're just recording, but that's your pencil, and you make many, many, many choices all the way along that results in a decision that other people look at. That is your photograph, that makes your photographs uniquely different than anybody else's photographs.
One of the other things, I was thinking about this idea of craftsmanship before we got together, and I was thinking, what are the components here? And one of the elements that I was thinking of is time. So in this whole circle, we share the component of time, what it takes the time to create and to craft something. In my case, I think it's we still share that component of time, but it's 180 degrees opposite, because I live in a world that is compressed into a very short period of time where I have to make a decision.
The thing about that is, though, Clint, is that you've spent a lifetime worth of effort learning to capture that instant of time. Yeah.
Yes, but it's a,
Yeah, I mean, because
It's honing
because
in on it, yeah,
you know what you're able to see and what you're able to capture. You've been, again, as you said, Dee Dee, you've been honing this and honing this and honing this your whole life, and you've really gotten to the point where you have very specific standards for yourself about what you expect of your photography, I would imagine.
Well,
So
there's another perspective I just wanted to throw in, because the craft versus art thing has gone on as a contemporary discussion for the last 40 years at least. And I've thought about it in one way, is that if a craft person says, well, I work in clay, and that's a given, and everything that I make will be made of clay, then you say, well, what comes first? In their case, their conceptual process begins with, that's the material of choice. Because other people start with, what's the idea? And then they search around for what material is best for the idea, and that's different. And so that's where the person may work in materials, work with their hands, but not be material based in as phase one. So it's kind of like, and a way to talk about photography is you're really working with light. So you're managing and capturing and looking at and managing light, which is captured in that moment. So it's kind of the most ethereal of materials.
I think it's all the collective ability to have a conversation with your waking dream. That you actually have a conversation with your dream, and you probably, my guess is, it took you a while to have enough confidence to have that dream and to embrace it and then have a conversation with it. And to the extent that it can, the material goes away. You go through the material, you know the material so well that you can express yourself.
That's why they call it
through.
a medium.
Right,
just that
it's a medium, yeah.
but I think that conversation with your dream starts much earlier. I think it starts almost before you're even aware that there's an art form. It's like you fall in love with the material, whether it be metal or stone or whatever it is. And as a kid, there's probably somebody who was a mentor to you, and you really weren't aware that it was a relationship like that. And it could have been accidental. I mean, in my case, I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, and the guy next to me just lived next door to us, happened to be a wedding photographer. And he showed me how to develop a print. And I thought that was just magic, but I wasn't aware that I was awakening to a dream. So I think that that part of it starts much earlier than a conscious awakening to a dream.
I think I'm just waking up.
Let me know how that feels. In a way, this is all it's your turn. You're being too polite.
No, well, thanks. I read this great book by a British author who was trying to study craftsmanship, and one of the themes that he injected into it, which we haven't spoken of yet, had to do with the level of risk. And when we make something, you can mechanize it to a point where there's very little risk in the outcome, or you can stick with your hand tools and work where there is total risk in the outcome. And you're trying to get to that place. And I think as people who make things, if we want to call ourselves craftsmen or artists, at one level, that's a part of what it's about for us. It's the material, it's the level of risk to arrive at what we're trying to have be an extension of ourselves, an expression of who we are.
You bring up risk, and I'm really glad you bring that up because risk is something that sells a lot in this world. Everybody's being taught to be afraid of this and afraid of that, and it's endless because it sells. But you're right. If you're an artist and a craftsman, there's a problem in that I say that nature doesn't spoil her children. They're the rules of nature, and if you break the rules, it falls apart. There's just, we can't discuss this, it's just not going to work. And so we get used to the idea of not being afraid of risk, but learning how to manage risk in a very physical way. And we find out, we pushed this a little far and snap, it went. It doesn't mean the world is over. It means we learned about that risk. And the next time we learned how to modulate how we dealt with the issue.
And you get smarter the next time.
Right. And how far you can continue to push it. Continue to push it.
Grab a mic. We have to be disciplined.
Okay, so completely agree. Risk is probably one of the things, if we step back from it and look at it, I mean, we all love to take risks. We all take risks. And yeah, you push it, you learn from it, and then you go on.
Well, the flip side could be said, which is comfort. And that you find comfort in a certain material, in a certain process, in a certain way of being, you know, and there's a form of mental health with that too, because you can go to the workshop and work with a material that doesn't talk back except in the form of snapping when you've pushed it a little too far. But I think that there's a solitary aspect to that. It'd be kind of interesting to just think about people that can become professional makers or object makers if they tend to like to be solitary, you know, and when it becomes a group process, usually it blurs over into production, or there's some sort of business component that's a little bit different than the creative, you know, part where the risk-taking is happening and you're making all these mistakes in the studios and discovering stuff. So there's kind of two things in the solitary comfort of making things. And I don't think it's risky. It's almost more risky to go out and try and make a living in a practical way.
Artists are very narcissistic, yeah? But it is very necessary to create something. And about risk-taking, you know what? It reminds your photos reminds me something interesting. You create an instant shot for a photo that will last forever, and you live like a performer. So there is a contradiction between the way you take the picture and the life of the picture itself.
Yes. So you asked us to share some near-death experiences. And this goes along with this conversation about risk.
Including these conversations here.
Yeah, and nobody else is here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, have a nice sustainable career, and I actually do like to work by myself alone, and then I go into this universe where it's very complex productions. That's basically what I do. And I recently had to solve a particular problem for a client, and they immediately said, oh, well, we can just scale this up and do this. And, you know, and I hadn't really proved this way of actually taking an image. And it's very complex to do. And the next thing I knew, I found myself in this 7-week project. And the very first day that we were on stage, the client from the agency walks in to do a client presentation, and they show it to the corporate client in front of about 20 people. And I had never seen the example of my work that they were about to show, and it looked like hell. And here we were committed to doing the 7-week project, and it was the biggest risk I had ever taken in my life. Everything was hanging in the balance, because I said to the guys on my crew, I said, this is for all the marbles. This is either going to work or it's not going to work. And we ended up working 20-hour days, you know, and it finally fell into place, and it finally all came together. But I tell you, that whole element of risk, I think I lost probably most of the hair in the back of my head on that one. So anyway, risk is a huge part of, I think, of what we do.
Let me summarize a few words that have come up. Comfort, which I don't think comfort is your friend as a creative person. I think it dulls your senses. But you're talking about risk. The other thing you were almost talking about there was failure. And I don't know if you've seen this movie when Picasso's painting a painting, he keeps on rubbing it out and responding to the failures and changing it and failing again and responding to the failures and going through the failure and doing it again on this canvas over and over again. And each time it looks amazing, and you can't bear that he's rubbing it out. You just can't bear it. Like there's 100 Picassos we just lost with him, but he's having a conversation with it and with the failure. And I wonder whether the coming to the edge of failure made you break through and it actually became a more successful project. Take the mic.
Okay. It actually did. But I have another question. Okay, so if
What was your first question? What's the other question?
Well, I should say I have a question to follow my answer.
Okay.
Okay, so the answer is yes, it did make it a better project and actually made me a much better photographer. So the question I have is, I'm working in and we're all working in these different formats, and Nick, I look at your work and I think, you commit yourself to this piece of stone. Nothing can be changed by the time you get to the end of it. And you've committed this huge amount of time to it. So from my eyes, my perspective, I'm looking at the risk you take when you take that final letter and you go to make that final letter.
The interesting thing about what I do is that people understand the finality of it. They understand, like, this is, as they say, this is carved in stone. It is indeed carved in stone. So the
Last letter.
the thing is that you know, all of the skill that all of us use in so many ways. Learning how to be comfortable, and this is an aspect of comfort that's interesting, because, as you say, well, comfort's not necessarily a good place to be. I mean, you get into a rhythm with these things and understanding the steps that you take and the ways in which you produce this work. And I can, you know, I am at a point right now where I'm so familiar with all of this that I don't have a problem with going down to the National Gallery and standing on the wall and sinking my chisel into a 100-year-old piece of absolutely beautiful limestone that can never, ever be replaced. I'm very, very comfortable with that. I know the limits. And there are instances like your photography project where, say, on the very, very large architectural inscriptions, a little bit more about the aesthetic than the actual carving of the work, where I say, this is all or nothing. We're either going to make this work or it's not going to pull together. But that's, as I say, that's more of an aesthetic thing.
Well, the design of it?
The design of it. Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of risk and mistakes and errors, the whole discussion of mistakes is so culturally loaded. First of all, if you make a mistake, it means you know already where you're going. And artists don't know where they're going. So you can't make a mistake if you just don't know what the path is. And every time you do something that doesn't necessarily go where you thought it ought to go, only taught you that you have some other place to work on. You know, it's not a failure. And by the way, the thing about comfort, I am one of these people. God bless my wife for dealing with this, but you know, I'm one of these people.
This is the second time his wife has come into this conversation.
Well, we live together.
She's in the room, by the way.
But you know, when I get too comfortable, I get very nervous and edgy, and I just have to be on the edge of things in my mind all the time. And if I get too comfortable, I just feel like I'm going to explode.
I have a question about that.
I just want to say that I so relate to that. And you know, Peter and I have looked at each other for I don't know how many years and said, what are we thinking? What is this? Why do we keep doing this? Like putting ourselves in this position of, okay, well, how are we going to pay this and la 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 la? And I'm like, I'm addicted to it. I can't help it. I realize I really like not knowing, being on the edge. It's just something that's invigorating, and I just find that I find comfort within the discomfort. It's like when my kids were born, they were really little, and my life everything just went all over the place. I'm just so uncomfortable. This is just like, and then I realized, you know, you just have to get comfortable with the discomfort. It's just the way it is, you know, and so that's kind of the way I feel about what we do. I couldn't imagine it any other way.
Well, yeah, there's something about the failure thing. Everybody seems to love to talk about how important failure is, and I think it's kind of overrated. Because it feels pretty damn good to finish a good piece and to do it on time and to succeed at it. So to me, those failures, yeah, I get pissed at them usually when they happen. It's like it's not something I'm like, oh wow, I just learned so much from that failure. It's like, no, I just learned so much from doing a good job with something. So I think that there's a little bit of bullshit that goes around with some of that. And then I kind of want to, well, kind of, you know, I knew he'd have a zinger or two for me. So is the idea of discomfort and comfort is that Dee Dee and I do our life has been sort of
Married.
Yeah, we're married, and we've been together professionally since '83, '84, or whatever. It's a huge leap of faith to make a living with your hands, right? And it's like the leap of faith I'm talking about is like we got 2 weeks to the next mortgage payment. How are you going to do that? And you haven't bought into any kind of program that's going to keep the dollars flowing in some way. So and then things happen. They kind of come about, but it's mostly because we've taken a leap of faith. We've kind of stand on our own ground, and we're going to make work that we want to make, and it's not based on some other person's criteria. But it's a real challenge in the American society to do that, where you're kind of surfing a wave and hoping you're gonna hang on to it.
Let me say, just for people here who haven't done all their homework, there's 2 MacArthur grant winners left and right here. There's a married couple. There's a gentleman who takes pictures of things that move fast, cars and planes and trains, and they're extraordinary photographs. There's a sculptor. There's a boat maker. There's another sculptor. And there's our little local hero here. I would urge you all, everybody has a computer, I would urge you to, in the next few days, to Google all these people and look at their images, if you haven't already. Some of you probably have. But I found it really quite wonderful. And I don't think we can underestimate what it took for somebody to think this up. It wasn't me. I had nothing to do with who got invited tonight. And it was terrific curation from a pool of people to do this. And going deep into each of, I mean, I learned so much going deeply into what you do. And when I met you, I said I couldn't believe you weren't Italian. He said French, and he makes a bow. Do you make bows for cellos too?
Sure.
So you don't make them just for violins?
No, violin, viola, and cellos.
I went on his site, and you learned not only about the wood, which is rare and is not going to be regrown, and then in fact how much he bought up and the cost of them, but what kind of horsehair they use and what kind of gold they use and it's just astonishing that somebody cares so much, and this kind of ultimate concern that each of you have, the caring goes with all the other stuff that you were saying.
I just want to bring up this, the idea of the standards that we hold ourselves to. Because every one of us holds ourselves to pretty high standards. And I think that has an awful lot to do with the way we live our lives, too. Like, Peter, you're saying, okay, look, at the end of the month, how am I going to get my mortgage payment and all of these things? But we've all chosen to live our lives particularly high standards, yeah? And I don't know. I'd like us to talk about that a little bit.
What about this idea of satisfaction? I find satisfaction with my own work to be just very fleeting. Just a moment, oh, that's great. And then it's like,
That's work.
and then it's, well, yeah, but it's like, I find something wrong with it. I mean, do you find the same thing?
Yeah, constantly.
I'm just totally involved in process, and to me, what's the things that come out of the process, you always want to be as right as they can be, but the process is what's going on. And for most of us, and I think I can speak to everybody, is people like to think of artists as kind of machines that produce products. But in fact, what we are is we are involved in this process, and our minds and our hands are moving on, solving problems all the time. And by the time we've done this one, it's over here and finished because we're out there, And that's just the way I think the creative mind operates.
I think my wife would agree with you. I'm looking around for it.
But when you say it's just a fleeting moment of satisfaction, is that the point where you click the button? Is that?
Yes, usually.
So then after that, it's more just about processing it, getting it to the place that the client might want it, or that?
Give him the mic, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's the same for all of us, whether it's an adrenaline rush. I mean, you feel a sense of momentary spike in your adrenaline that this was exactly right.
When you take the picture, when you look at the picture later, to choose which one you want to use.
Oh, I already know which one I want to use.
When you click it.
Yeah,
Really?
absolutely.
Gee, that surprises me.
Why?
I wish I had a button.
Are you an innie or an outie? Really, I'm surprised
I
at
think,
that.
I want to go back to the risk thing, because I get the risk of succeeding in life, having a family, paying your mortgage, all of that, the risky side of the lifestyle, whatever. The risk I was talking about really goes to, we were talking about craftsmanship, and the level of risk of achieving the standard of the object. Do you get it or do you miss it? The risk is, at the one level of a sculptor, the risk is very high because there's little control, there's little mechanization. He has a chisel, he has a mallet, he has his own judgment, his own eyesight, and his own skill at using the chisel. The antithesis of that would be a machine that you type in on a computer what you want it to do, and that machine robotically, as a dislocated router, is going to mechanically do the same thing. And we can do that now. And so the question isn't
With no
about
soul.
whether...
No
Sorry?
soul in
No
the mechanical
soul.
process.
Well, I think there is soul, and I think that that's why we're attracted to the certain materials that we're attracted to, whether it's wood or whether it's stone or whether it's metal. The metals that are used in the photographic process. The material is a significant thing. The level of risk at the execution is not insignificant. And I think when you put those together, we as a craftsman, as a builder, are going to be driven severely in that direction. We're not going to do anything else. I knew I was that way.
You're not going to do anything else? What does that mean? I don't understand.
Well, it's like you're being drawn to sculptor or drawn to photography, and with me, I just love wooden boat building, and that's what I'm going to do. The opportunity I had to turn that into education was so rewarding and so meaningful, because all of the kids that are enrolled in here are just like me. They're going to do this. And we've got an environment now where they can come, and this didn't exist when I came along. I had to learn it a different way, and it was just different. But now we have a place where they can come and become immersed in the processes, in the materials, and come out with what they're trying to create.
But I think that we're called craftsmen, but in fact, the whole world of craftsman's art, you know, all these tools that all of us use, including everybody out there who's not here, they're all just parts of a path. Like, for instance, and we pick things, like you're right, at a certain point in your life, you pick something and it centers you, and you know that that's a focus. But that, for many people, that changes, you know, and it grows. I don't have a particular thing, by the way.
I think it picks you. I think whatever that passion is kind of picks you when you're young. I mean,
Yeah, I just washed up on the beach.
yeah. Okay, so here's this other idea of craftsmanship, is generational authorship, which you just touched on. It goes back so many generations, even beyond the people we know. Who makes up our DNA that says, this is what I'm going to be? When you sign your name to something, whose name are you signing to that? I mean, how many names
I think
preceded
now's
that?
the time for some woo-woo music. I don't know about that. Go ahead.
I just, you know, I don't know how, I mean, I think genetically, yes, the art, being an artist or thinking like an artist or spatial thinking you know, you can be attracted to lots of different things. I mean, I knew that I wanted to be an artist, and that I wanted to express things, think about things, design things, make things. But it wasn't until I actually landed in the metals department, which I chose to do at RISD after having gone into the sculpture department and realized I don't know how to work with anything. I mean, I've got these ideas, but I can't make anything, you know? So I went into metals and realized then that I love metal. I love it. I'm grounded by it. I feel like when I'm working with it, I'm just kind of, yeah, that's the place where you lose the sense of time.
You know, we went to the same
program.
place. And what you're talking about, as much as I might say other things, when I was really lost in trying to find myself, and I went into that workshop, and I picked up a particular hammer. It's called a planishing hammer. And it was like lightning shot through my body. And I looked at that and I thought, that's it. That's it. I've been looking and looking and looking and looking, and that's it. And it was it. I mean, for a long time. I mean, I became a silversmith and then went on to make bronzes and then did all kinds of other things. But for that time, that was it. That was a major centering thing. And it's like you said, I don't know whether it chose me or I chose it, but it was the interaction that was the anchor.
One of the questions I want to ask is that, and you touched on this a little bit, is, you know, we all make these things, and there are practical aspects. In my particular field, what I'm doing is I'm conveying communication through through my lettering. I'm getting a message out there that people are meant to read through the letters that I carve, right? Yes, a CNC machine can do it, and it can do a perfectly decent job of conveying the exact same message, but what is it about my work that differentiates it? This is the thing where I'm thinking about in terms of all of this. Why do we put so much effort into, again, back to the standard a little bit, but the aesthetic and it's like a wooden boat. I mean, I'm sorry, but the curve of the line on that vessel is incredibly attractive. I don't want to see some mechanical version of that. I want to see that fucking thing right there. So, I don't know. I'm just opening the idea of this.
I had the word nuance was coming to mind with craft, is that it's like people get to a level of mastery, which is, there's a lot of finesse when you get quite good at something, and you realize the subtlety of a curve of a boat like that. And part of where craft, I think still, you can craft words, and so you can use a typewriter with your elbows, I suppose, and be crafting. So I think it's worth reminding ourselves that it's about this kind of nuance of control over whatever the language is that you're working in. But what I guess back to the traditional idea of craft, working with your hands and maybe doing it solitary, sort of meditative sort of way, is that there's space in time for your intuition to sort of work through. You know, in your mind, you know, when you're working on something and so your mind drifts away into 1,000 things. And the steady movement of the material is sort of, I think what Dee means also is the kind of grounding part of that. But in the computer era that we're in, it's sort of like, where's the nuance? And that's where I think sometimes the hand, you can carve a curvature or do something that the computers can then scan and do a lot of fancy things with. But it's much more difficult with the language, with working with the computers, to get the nuance.
Well, it's the eye-hand relationship, and there's something very satisfying. I mean, I'm sure for tons of people, but it's like when you're actually physically writing something versus typing something is a completely different experience for me, anyway. I mean, the actual writing is so satisfying, and I feel like there's a connection going on.
Little decisions that are happening between your eye and your hand.
Yeah, but you know, that's just as true as somebody who's with somebody who is writing computer code. I mean, in other words, the point is, these are all media through which the human brain creates some byproduct. On the way to someplace else, maybe, but it's creating byproducts, and we're interested in the byproducts because we can see them. I mean, we can, we do something, like we make livings with the byproducts. But I say that there's, I remember walking through Romanesque churches in Italy, and you go along, look at all those interesting little animals on the capitals, and then you go, wow, you look at that one, and there's all these 20 of them or something, and there's that one that's incredible. Oh, well, that was done by John Bologna. In other words, he started along with everybody else, but he had this spark, and he had this thing that I guess you call art. And so to me, and when I was in the world of doing things with craft, there was always this sort of issue of what is art and what is craft. And I think the main problem with that discussion is that we want to think about it as a machine. That it is a thing. It's a thing you have. You are an artist, like you are an engineer, or you're something else. You're not. It's a quality.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, though, but I'm not sure in the same way, that people say art versus craft, and they're two different kinds of words. Like, you don't art something, right? You craft something, right? So kind of like, well, so the art is already objectified. It's already out. But then the craft is how you get there. So it's like, in some ways, it's the doing. When crafting is the action part of it. And so how can you compare the action process with the object part? I mean, you can, but it sort of helps to clarify the different.
But art is a level. I mean, you can do anything you want, and if you take it to a high enough level, it becomes an art. It's not art and craft. If you're an incredible comedian, it's the art of comedy. It's the level that you take something. It's not art or craft. It's the level that you build the boat, the level that you take a photo, the level that you do jewelry, the art of making a bow, the art of doing. It's the level.
The other thing is that oftentimes you find that if you step back and you do what you're doing, you receive all sorts of different labels. So, well, he's a lettering artist. Well, no, he's a craftsman. He's an artisan. I don't know, I'm doing my thing, man. It's,
Well,
it's what
and
it
then the
is.
academics came up with practitioner.
A practitioner, right.
I mean, to me, you know, we have to live in a society or we can't exist, and the society has to have a certain kind of structure. And in order to have the structure, we have to have labels for things in categories so we can understand one another, including every one of these words. Just like every brick in this building, it has an order to it, so we make a certain generalization in order just to get along together. But they're phony. They're only there so we can agree to be together and talk to one another, if you're going to talk about words. But none of them are precise. So the word artist is just a glaring example of that. It's just, it's not really a thing. It's an idea so we can all agree. It's like love or you name any, try to define it. You can't do it, you know?
It's a starting point. It's a starting point of a conversation or of a, yeah.
It's a way to have the
Understanding, yeah.
conversation, you know?
I think it might be a way for the world that's non-artistic to look in on the world that is artistic. So in other words, I don't know if we necessarily see each other as artists. I don't see myself as an artist. Right. I see myself as a photographer. But it's a label that everybody else, so that they can understand you rather than how you can understand yourself.
Right. And talk about comfort. A lot of that comes in to say, well, people, what do you do? Are you an artist? Absolutely. And so what's the answer to that? It says, yeah, you know, I mean, say something, you know, say something, get him off my back, you know. So it's, oh, do I fit in this category? But when you talk about comfort, a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea that we don't really know what this is, you know. And there's a lot of people who are very risk averse and fearful that they don't know the answers to these things. And when they don't know who you are or what you do, it makes them anxious.
So here we come back to this whole idea of risk again. Okay, whether it's in the individual piece or whether it's in our personality. Because I think, you know, speaking for myself, I'm not risk averse at all. Matter of fact, I jump off of tall buildings with very small parachutes, but a lot of times go splat in the ground. But at the same point, I think maybe we share that characteristic.
Absolutely.
You do?
Yeah, very much so.
You know, one of the...
Go ahead.
One of your uncle, Richard, wrote a book that was images of boats. And each one of them, he wrote a little essay. And he did one of the essays was an essay about the USS Constitution. And there was this picture of this boat that was just a wreck. And in it, there was a piece of information that I sort of did a mental riff on, which was that no part of the boat, no part of the original boat still existed. That had all been replaced. In other words, the boat is an idea. That particular boat is an idea. And if you could speed up the life of that boat so that 100 years was a minute-long video, it would look like something else beside the boat, but it would have the general form of the boat. That would always be there. It's the idea that stays. And what we're doing is we're creating ideas in some transitory form, but it's slow enough so we can look at the stone and go, oh yeah, I recognize that. I feel good because I can see that you did a good job on this piece of stuff.
I have a question for what I think is, you're very traditional, I would imagine, in the practice of making the bows. Are you breaking some rules? I break some rules. I guess my question is, do you ever feel restless in the sort of the power that tradition has over what you do?
Well, I work in a very, very conservative world. Musicians are extremely conservative. So I have to reproduce bows that have been made early 19th century and in the exact proportions. It makes me most of the time a little bit frustrated because where is the creativity when you have to reproduce something that is existing since decades and centuries? So I try to break the rule and to create something new, even though I know that this world is very conservative. And this way, I feel that, I can master the techniques of making a bow. I have learned my hands to work, so they followed me, no problem. And now my mind can start and can start thinking, creating something new. And I did. So it was, my first invention was pretty badly received, especially in France, where I had been stoned for having dared to change something in that way. But I survived, and I stepped further, and I created a new invention, and another again, and now people are starting to understand why I did that, and so I think things are changing, and for the good, I think, because I would like to make a musician's life easier. This is my role.
Let me ask a general question. How many people here only do work because they are asked to? In other words, you are asked to take a picture of a jaguar. You're asked to make a bow. You're asked maybe to build a boat or do something. You're asked to make letters. And how many of you just generate work without the client? And how important is that interaction with another human being? And just go around the room of your relationship between what generates the beginning. You know, beginnings. What's the beginning for you?
I cannot not do the work. I'm constantly, and with or without the client, I have to be doing something. Even if it's in a bar with a napkin and a ballpoint pen scribbling God knows what, I must do that. So I am constantly making.
I actually, one of the reasons that we started doing the restoration work was that somebody would tell us something that they wanted to do, because the rest of my life was just living in dreams and making, you know, my art. I sort of had a smirk at one point. Someone asked me if they wanted me to be commissioned to do a piece for a competitive piece here in Newport. I said, look, just forget it. I don't. My work comes from some place in the around 1900 from Eastern Europe. I mean, nobody understands what I do here, and it's fine. You know, it's just what I have to do, and I'm always at the edge. Right now, I'm developing 2 patents, and I have no idea whether anything's gonna. I have no idea what's gonna happen with them. I'm always out there like that. I only do something for somebody else because I have to.
In my case, I'd say 95% self-generated, and I only wish people asked me more often. So I figure that's a marketing problem. They should call. You know, like, why is nobody calling?
You want to feel wanted.
So you want to have a job. That's right. And so
You want to have a house.
So you know, it's constant generating the ideas and so on, and then in my case, it's about applying and proposing and competing, really. So you never really get the easy option.
I don't know where the percentage would fall, but over the career, there have been several projects that we did on speculation, as it's called in the industry, and several that were funded, and some really fabulous restoration work in England in particular that was for a private owner with an unlimited budget. That's the kind you want. And so I've done work under all of those circumstances, and I think that's expectable. It's a little bit different than your creative side of it, I think, although I've drawn a few boats on bar napkins myself.
You know, I have to say something about the risk thing. I call myself an independently unemployable individual, you know. I am not able to work for I tried. I really tried. It didn't work.
But I understand that aspect of you.
well, but I started to understand, thank you. I started to understand that the riskiest thing that people can do is be afraid of risk. Because risk happens. It's a reality of every second of life. And if you think that you can avoid it, then you're in a state of denial about the most important thing that's going on in your life.
We'll be quiet for a few seconds. Now.
I couldn't agree with you more. I guess, you know, to ask that question, Richard, you have to say, okay, I am only X. Okay, so am I getting do I do work on my own outside of my photography? So I never really I see photography as simply a recording device of the way in which I like to see the world. So I guess I'm always seeing the world. So whether I'm out on a sailboard or doing something crazy or whatever it is I'm doing, I'm always actually in the process of seeing. So in that sense, I never really stop. The other thing is that I really like to, in my work, I work on really complex production problems. And a lot of it has to happen really fast, and the decisions have to happen in a split second. And so I also like to do that in my life. I have an appreciation for architecture. And, you know, I've taken on some pretty crazy construction projects. And I like to do it. I like to solve the spatial problem. So is one work and one not work? I kind of don't see a distinction between the two of them.
I wasn't asking work or not work. I was saying whether you depend on a client base. Does the client make your work better, or would you rather, or just, what is that?
I would hope it's the other way around. I mean, you know, you do better work for a client because somebody's invited you to do something. But at the same time, the real competition is with yourself.
Well, I find that I'm really bad at commissions. I really wish I was better, but when people come to me and say, you know, I have this stone, or I really need a necklace, and they know that I make jewelry, it's like, I don't know. I just don't know what to say. If you want to look at my work and you love something I've done and you feel that that's the right feeling that you want, I can't just make something for someone else, like out of the blue. It just doesn't, because there's so many different intersecting factors that you have to be concerned about. So I just love making my work, and my ideas just come out of my head. It's problem solving, it's spatial thinking, and I love pushing the idea of jewelry, and I love pushing the idea of, you know, how you wear jewelry and, you know, ornament and all that, and the ideas just keep coming, and I just keep wanting to make it. And fortunately, you know, there is a market with jewelry. People do buy jewelry. There is, you know, it's more likely to move than like my pictures or something. You know, I know relatively secure that eventually it'll sell, but I'm just not good at trying to, you know, having people come to me and say, make me this or make me that.
And last but not least, do you work on commissions?
Yes, I work mostly on commission. I make bows for a particular playing style, particular musician who has a particular playing style, a particular instrument, and I have to mix all together and go to my cuisine and make the bow for him or her. So it involves a lot of different criterias, and this is the most interesting part of my work, and I have learned a lot doing that.
He's talking so quietly, I don't know if you heard what he said, but what he said was rather extraordinary, that he designs for a particular instrument, a particular way of, a particular person, a particular way they play. I find that astonishing, just astonishing, amazing. That's amazing.
For me, that one-on-one comes when, for instance, now that, you know, when we've had the gallery over the years, when people come in, or when I do a show and I go out and I'm in my booth and people come in, and I love working with someone right there when they're trying to find something and how it works, you know, works on them, or what they're, you know, what makes them feel really good. And that interaction to me is really special, just that personal kind of.
When I looked at your work, I thought, looking at Jaguar, looking at different cars, looking at different things, I thought you were really, that was your client, that the car was talking to you and telling you what it wanted to be, and how it wanted to be photographed. That the client was not a person, but in that case, it was the problem.
I actually take the pictures by driving the car. So I'm driving the car and taking the picture at the same time.
Is it
Okay.
allowed?
That's better than texting.
It is talking to me. It is talking to me. it is talking to me.
Nick, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to ask Didi, do you feel as though the direction that the design of your jewelry takes can be difficult to resolve in terms of the clientele asking you about things, and you have a very, very particular direction that you're going with it, and it's an evolution that you're trying to follow? Is there some of that that's happening?
Well, what I think is hard is when people don't really understand what I actually do. And so, in my own way, I am limited in terms of, I've been doing this for years and years, but I've been doing it my way for years and years. And so they might assume that I know how to set stones and that I work with stones. And a lot of that assumption, and when they come in and ask me to, it always turns out to be a nightmare for me.
I
Because
think she
feel
was saying
like,
she just doesn't do that.
well, I know, but I want to be able to do it. It scares me. It's like I don't want to disappoint somebody. I don't want them to expect something of me that I'm really not up for. I usually say I know someone who's really, really, really good at that.
Yeah, this is a problem that I have too, that is really very describable for me between art and craft and other things like that. Like when I'm making art, I'm off in my own head, and when I try to do design, which is kind of a melding of art and craft, I get very confused. I'm really not very good at that. But if I have to restore something that exists, and what I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of engineering and a lot of mathematics and a lot of physics and a lot of, traditional looking at things, and then there's a whole ground of something that already exists. I'm very happy doing that, and I'm very happy working with a client who wants certain things and is happy that I can do these things. But the art thing is my private business, and I can't have anybody else around while I do it.
We're going to take 2 questions. If anybody has a good question, but make sure it is not a speech and it's a good question. Okay? And somebody give her a mic. She's not a plant. I didn't know we were going to do this. In fact, I thought we wouldn't take any questions, but.
We haven't talked about, and I don't know about any of your educations or your background or if you went to school for any of this, but something that's always been kind of on my mind with music and with artwork and artists was watching my father, he doesn't know, and this is just bringing it to the piano, he doesn't know a note, technically. He doesn't know A through F. And when I was 7, I got sent to take lessons, and I feel like in the 21 years, he has evolved knowing technically nothing. And I haven't evolved, at all without going and learning and looking at notes. And I'm wondering whether or not you guys feel like in order to push it and to really push your craft and develop new things, that a technical education would help you or it would, restrict you.
She was my shill, sorry.
She was my shill.
No, because I had in my mind that here we are in a school and we haven't talked about education directly yet. And what you brought up is the general category of what it is to really get a complete education. And to me, the idea that you have to do 2 things. One of them is you have to get a good liberal arts education. You have to know about the big world. And if not, you become just a piece of a machine. On the other hand, you have to know how to do one thing really, really, really well. And after you learn that one thing, you can do other things really well too, but you can't do it unless you know that one thing.
This is a forever conversation because I don't believe in what you just said. I think each of us learns in a different way, and it's not about education. It's about how we each learn and what our particular curiosities are and our own journey. And I don't think you have to get a BA. And in fact, I think it's a myth that we all have to get a BA. And in fact, I think this place that we're in, part of it is to say you don't have to get a BA. You have to follow your curiosity and follow your desire and your desire to learn. And for a select group of people who have that kind of curiosity, they come and they build a boat here. And they don't have to have a BA to build a boat. And I don't have to have the degrees I have to do what I do. I was never taught to do anything I do, even though I have some degrees. I wish there was a pill for curiosity, a pill for going on that journey of embracing your curiosity.
I just need to respond to that, because I totally agree with you.
That's your response.
That's only
That's
part.
good enough for me, Howard. Howard, that'll work every day with me.
It's not going to work for me, Richard. I'm sorry. That's only the first part. So, no, but the other thing is the assumption that one has to go to an institution to become educated is totally wrong.
I agree. That is what I was saying.
But what I said,
But it's not bad either. You can also go to an
Right,
institution
right,
and go deeply into something, and you can. I am not looking down my nose at professionals that do anything. I just think you should embrace your curiosities. If it leads to being a lawyer, God forbid, or whatever it leads to is really okay if you do it genuinely and with deep curiosity. But it doesn't mean getting the right degree or a stamp there's no path. When I walk out this door, there could be a sign there with an infinite number of cities in the world pointing different directions. And you choose that. Or it could be just going to Washington Square or something. You have to take that journey. That's your choice.
The other thing about education today...
I don't believe in that grandfather theory either, that how you write might be the way your grandfather did.
No, I don't think it's the way... I just wonder what mix of DNA made us who we are that have the ability. I'm not saying... I'm reaching back much further than grandfathers.
Okay.
Whose name am I really signing here? To your point about education, I think we're in an era now of self-education, and it's personal responsibility. The one thing that I can say to you about education is I firmly believe that you need to wake up every single day and teach yourself something new. That's the most important thing I can tell you. You've got to, you're responsible for your own future, you're responsible for your own education. How you get that education is up to you. But you must wake up every single day with a sense of curiosity that says, I want to learn something today.
We're going to take one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to Terry. You're too close to the other person. We'll go. Good question. No speech.
You're all very accomplished artisans, and I would like to hear you discuss beauty, the concept of beauty, and I'd really like to see if there's a common or a consensus that you can build on what is beautiful.
Well, it's connected to part of the earlier question, I think. At least my first answer is that one of the things that I like about art as a field is that there is no right and wrong, and that if anything, there's no particular rules that you need to live by, that it's your game if you want to play it. So there's that. There's a profession in which no one has to tell you what you think is cool or beautiful, so it's kind of up to you. And then back to, was it your father or grandfather in the piano, is that there's just, the emphasis in some ways I would just say is, what are you listening to? Because he's probably listening to something other than a rule book on notes. And I think it's easy in education to get really distracted by what everybody else thinks you need to be thinking about and how to think about it. And that's what academics do, is they try and program or create programs in which some messaging happens, And I think back to that same point is, if you take charge of it yourself, you're in charge of your own messaging, and you need to seek out your own answers. And if other people get in your way, then they're probably in your way.
One thing I also wanted to say is that the idea of for so many of us who are craftsmen, we have others who do the same type of thing that we do. Often people say, oh, well, you do this type of thing, my friend does that type of thing. You find that within your field, so many of the people who do what you do, you all have a very, very specific way of doing it your own way. And you find that the subtleties within that help to describe the aesthetic, the beauty of these things. And it becomes so incredibly subtle. This is what I imagine with Benoit too, the subtlety of all that you do. I mean, it's just so minute. And the way in which we appreciate these things and the way in which we see them among ourselves too. Artisans can get together and see very, very, very subtle aspects of our own work that we really find pleasing. I don't know, that's kind of where I was going with that anyway.
Isn't beauty tied to communication? If you can communicate beauty, I mean, there's a connection there some way. You can speak to yourself for sure, but if I can speak to one other person and they can find what I'm trying to say, then essentially it has beauty.
But the definition of beauty changes in time. What is beautiful today was not necessarily beautiful, will be beautiful in 10 years.
But day
And we
glow
know
is
that
back in fashion. So.
Well, there's a part of beauty, depending on what this gentleman means, that has to do with fashion and what's accepted in culture. And there's a time when Egyptian art was not thought of as being that beautiful, and then became very special. Then it goes on these waves. There's a cultural thing about what we call beauty.
Well, popularity.
Popularity, beauty, fashion. It changes. It's not an absolute beauty. So we each have an aesthetic, and it changes.
I think there's two. There's two parts of this discussion.
We're playing around with words now.
Well, one of them is that there's a discussion of beauty with the social definition, and that is what is accepted as being beautiful. And the world is filled with those norms that are there. But for people who work and make things, there's a point where something, when you're working on, starts to sing back to you. You're doing this thing, and all of a sudden it lights up, and you know you're there, and that to me is beauty. Whether it's beautiful as somebody else, I have no idea, but that to me is my own beauty.
It's a very difficult question to answer, asked that way. It's just this. Terry, why don't you come up? Terry put this thing together through his staff, and Terry would like to say a few words to you, and then there's a whole party and a whole other bunch of stuff. He's the big deal here.
I have nothing to offer beyond what you've heard. In fact, it's quite intimidating to be up here now. We are deeply honored, and IYRS is really honored to host this discussion. And I think all of us, with a round of applause, ought to thank our guests tonight. One of the things that we would like to do at IYRS is we'd like to broaden our conversation about craft beyond what we do here. What happens here is really extraordinary, and something that Clark has shared with me is that what happens here as part of the process is that we give people the time and the opportunity to fail really well, so eventually they can get a self-permission to succeed. And I think that was a little bit of what the conversation was about before we started talking about something as lofty as beauty. But I just want to thank all of you for opening up your studios and also coming tonight and sharing your thoughts. And I want to especially thank Richard